Welcome to Music Mania. I'm your host, King Crusoe, but you can call me KC. So this time around, we're going to be talking about a whole boatload of singles and nearer to the end of the video, and also be talking about a couple albums that I re-listened to this week as a result of not really any album releases. In fact, 2 of the 3 albums that we're going to be talking about today are re-listens, and the other album that we're going to be talking about did release last week, but I didn't listen to prior to recording the previous episode. Time constraints and other random stuff along those lines is the reason for that happening. Nothing that we need to get into too much further for this video. For now, let's start off just as we normally do with the album releases for the week. Even though, like I said, a couple of them are re-listens, let's jump over here and talk about the new album that I didn't talk about in the previous video. That is Impermanence by No Eye Has Seen. You'll see that I've already rated and marked my listen date and written a review for it. I thought that Impermanence was okay. Not a bad album by any means, but not something that really clicked for me either, and also happened to be something that I think Invent Animate fans would really enjoy. I'm not the biggest Invent Animate fan amongst at least people that I know. I enjoy them enough, but I've bounced off of a lot of their work more than I have enjoyed it. Heavener I thought was a pretty good album. I really loved the EP, The Sun Sleeps As If It Never Was, as I talk about in this portion of the review here. But besides like those 2 works, I've kind of bounced off of Invent Animate, but I think that big fans of that band will be really into this album for what it is. Although ironically, my favorite song on the album is the one that is most reminiscent of IA, so take that opinion with a grain of salt. I enjoyed Impermanence for what it was, but definitely not my favorite thing to release. Next up, let's go ahead and talk about, instead of putting these in my listens, I wanted to put them in the album section directly because they are still new enough releases. Because they're recent re-listens, I figured I would justify myself in doing so. The first one of these you actually can kind of see sneaking out down here. This is going to be Ascension by Mirar once again. I did do my re-listen of this pretty shortly after finishing the video last week and wrote a second review for it, whereas a lot of the rest of the time I just kind of edit my first review. I mark whatever I listen to as a re-listen, whatever, but I edit the original review to include a little bit of a second section if I need to, and maybe adjust the standout track listing if I feel like my opinion of the standout tracks changed. This time around for Ascension, I figured it would actually make sense to make an entirely separate second review for it, in which I do actually recommend Ascension. I enjoyed it a lot more the second time. In fact, after the second time, I found that the only tracks I didn't really enjoy were still the intro and then the first song after that, which I think any other time I listen to this album, I'll just skip those 2 and listen to the rest, because yeah, the rest are really good. I just think that the beginning, I don't think the intro track fits for the album very well. I'm pretty sure I said the same thing last week. And then the first full-length track beyond the intro is one that, I don't know, just doesn't work for me. I think it's too much too soon. It works to kind of get you into that soundscape, I guess, but it was hard for me to enjoy both times around. But I did enjoy most of the rest of the album this time, to the point that all of my standout tracks changed basically, except for up here at the very end. So I enjoyed Ascension a lot more the second time, and I think this is one that I'm going to return to a lot more, even still, as time goes on. Next up is going to be a re-listen of Paleface Swiss's Cursed, which the first time that I listened to this and reviewed it, I basically said I don't really get what the active hate about it is. I enjoyed the soundscape. I thought it was solid enough for what it is, and I respect these guys for doing whatever it is they want to do, despite there being, you know, some inconsistencies or problems with the album. This is kind of what I was talking about with the last one. Normally, I would just edit my review for the first listen. That's exactly what I did this time. I put a little edit and said, yeah, I did a re-listen, and basically adjusted my opinion, and then also changed the standout tracks a little bit. I really like Kurtz, to be honest. A couple of my favorite tracks on here are ones that are basically Slipknot songs. I'm a Slipknot fan, so that's not a diss at all. I love those tracks a lot, actually, and even beyond those tracks, I think that the album is interesting, and even the moments that on their own separately, such as songs like Enough, which don't really work on their own, kind of work in the context of the full album listen in ways that I'm like, yeah, I kind of respect that. I enjoy it. I think Cursed is pretty solid. It's definitely not as bad as a lot of people might try to lead you to believe. But that is all that I have for albums for this video. Let's talk about a new release in an EP. This one actually also came out last week, but I didn't know about this one until just a handful of days ago, so I gave it a shot. What Is It Like by Fall Weather, which, as far as I understand, is a post-hardcore band. A buddy of mine put this one on my radar. I'm more of a metalcore person than I am a post-hardcore person, but because the lines between those two genres can really blur and basically become the same thing in certain times, depending on the artist and the time period and whatever, I was like, okay, I'll get that a shot. I didn't really enjoy this release a whole lot. Not something that I would say is awful, but I don't personally recommend it just because I'm not really the audience for this one. Plus, I think the album, or the EP rather, because it's only like 7 songs, it tends to be a little bit samey. It kind of repeats ideas enough that like only the intro and outro tracks really feel sonically different than the rest of the release. So it's one that's like, it has a good idea going for it, even if that idea isn't really my thing, and it also just doesn't fully execute on that idea to the degree that I almost wish it did. So I wanted to like it, but I just find myself feeling so-so on it, which is basically what I said in this review. Next up, we're going to move into the whole ton of singles that we're going to talk about for this video. There was plenty of solid releases, especially this, last couple of days. This particular weekend has had a lot of things drop, not least of which being Whitechapel's Hymns in Dissonance, which is a fantastic single. I thought that A Visceral Wretch, or whatever the first single was called, was okay. I didn't love it. I probably would have rated that one like a 3.5 star, like it was good for what it was. I would say that Hymns in Dissonance, and all these I'm going to have to remember to mark as listens for yesterday, was super solid. I thought this single was actually really enjoyable and has me really excited for the full album. I hear that the full album that this is going to be off of is once again a concept record, and I like concept albums a lot, so I'm looking forward to it. Next up is more deathcore, in which I forgot to go in and actually select the single. Let's find it. It is nowhere to be. There it is. I, The Descent, because for whatever reason, Musicboard doesn't do a great job labeling the difference between singles and albums sometimes. I, The Descent was a solid track. I thought it continues upon the band's sound and what they've been doing recently pretty well. I love this album art as well, and I overall enjoyed the song. It was also interesting in that it's not a terribly long song, but it still packs in plenty of ideas, makes itself unique and individualized. It doesn't sound like just any other deathcore song out there. So for that reason, I'm kind of have to rate this pretty highly. I'm gonna say 3.5 star for now, but I really enjoyed the song for what it is. So there's I, The Descent. Next up is going to be another deathcore release, but this is Impending Doom's next single for an upcoming EP, I guess, Snakes and Saints. And of these 3 short little tracks that they've released so far, between this, Punishment, and Christ is King, Snakes and Saints is by far the best one of these songs. I'm going to actually call this like a solid 4-star track. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I think it is by far the best of these 3 songs so far, and maybe the best of the Impending Doom songs that I've heard in general. I haven't listened to a ton of these guys, mostly just their 2022, is that the year it came out, the EP that came out a couple years back, and these 3 singles, so definitely not a lot that I've listened to, but I think this song is pretty solid, so that is what I'm going to rate Snakes and Saints. Black Hole by Architects is the real standout single release for the week, and it is very good. People kept on saying, oh, this might be the best of the 4 singles so far, and I'm like, that's a pretty, tough bar to cross, or tough bar to clear, I guess would be the proper terminology there, because Whiplash is a very solid song that like exemplifies what metalcore, at least modern metalcore at this point, is, and Seeing Red I think is my favorite single so far, but Black Hole comes very close to meeting that. Like, it immediately had me going all stank face. The first like 5-10 seconds were already going super solid, and the song in general really balances the uncleans and the cleans, and different variations to Sam's vocals that most other Architect songs don't deign to do. So Black Hole was a very solid release. I enjoyed it quite a bit, even though I said I wouldn't listen to it until the full album came out because it's been enough singles. I think this might actually be the last single of theirs that I listened to prior to the album drop, because 4 singles is enough for me, but all 4 of those singles have been quite good, in my opinion. Next up is the re-recording of Barbarian that Argus Burns Red is doing for the drop late in January for the re-recording of Thrill Seeker. And Barbarian is not my favorite song on the album, admittedly. Between this and Your Little Suburbia is in Ruins, or whatever the first single is called, I think Barbarians is just an okay song. Like, it's solid for the first half or something like that. Back half kind of drops off and isn't nearly as interesting to me. So, like, it's a good song, but definitely not one of my favorites on the album in general, not on the original release, and I don't think it's going to change my mind in this re-recording. Next up, I once again forgot to actually go in and select a single. The Narrator, who dropped an album in 2024 that I more or less recently came around to and started listening to, they also dropped a new single called Drawn, Conned, and Deceived, which is a solid song. I think it might be better than anything that is on Lore. Solid four stars, you know, pretty general track. If you listen to metalcore, you kind of know what you're getting into for this one, but this one differentiates itself from the previous songs of theirs that I've heard up to this point, so I respect it. Next up is going to be Coheed and Cambria's Someone Who Can, which of the 3 singles that they've dropped so far for Vaxis 3, I really enjoy Someone Who Can. I think it is a great song, actually. When it comes down to it, I think the times that I have the most fun with Coheed and Cambria is when they just have, you know, the fun, bouncy tracks that are more melodious. And this is one of those songs. Like, many of my favorite songs of theirs are just the easy, fun to listen to ones that you don't have to think too much about, even though they're definitely a concept album band and have a lot of like darker sonic soundscapes at times. And between like my favorite albums of theirs and my favorite tracks, like, a lot of the ones have really good sonic differentiation, but Someone Who Can is a very solid, just fun single. I'm like, yeah, I really enjoyed that for what it is. Not sure how it's going to fit on the full album, but I'm looking forward to Vaxis 3. I think it's going to be a more or less sonic continuation of what Vaxis 2 was, and Vaxis 2 is solid. Like, most of their albums are pretty solid, so I'm looking forward to that. Next up is, I'm going to be a broken record here, Last Night Saved My Life released a new single called Thunder, which between these 3 singles listed in here, I think this is actually like my favorite of these 3 singles. It's not super standout as far as pop punk or Last Night Saved My Life goes, but I'm a pop punk guy. I really enjoy it. Like, it's got a huge soft spot for me as far as like favorite genres go. You have like metalcore and deathcore at the top, and like pop punk is really, really high up there just as being a soft spot. I think Thunder is a pretty solid song. It's better than Blue Moon for sure. Bet Her Heart's kind of on a similar level, I'll say. I'm excited for whatever these guys are going to be putting out with these 3 singles next because, well, I like pop punk, and I think these guys are a pretty good example of what that is. Next up is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, is it going to be, yeah, it's the last single that we're talking about this week. It is a double side, or not a double side, it's a joint single by, I'm guessing this is meant to be Builds or Bloods or something. I'm not sure how this band is supposed to be called. And Righteous Vendetta. This is on my radar because I know Righteous Vendetta, but I know Righteous Vendetta for being a metalcore band. And this song is not really metalcore. It's something a little bit different. So it was unexpected in that way, but it's kind of a similar case of like Someone Who Can by Coheed and Cambria, in that sometimes I just enjoy listening to fun music, even if it isn't super heavy or even if it isn't super complex. Two Sides is one of those songs. It's not got a whole ton going for it, but I really like what it was doing nonetheless. Not sure where this fits in an overall catalog on what either of these artists are going to be doing in the future, but I liked the song enough for what it was, so that is my rating. But that is definitely, and now that that's all updated, that is all that I have for this week. I know I should have talked about technically a couple of those albums in the My Listens section, but because, you know, they were relatively recent releases and re-listens to kind of basically expand on my thoughts the first time that I listened to them recently. I figured, we'll just include them in albums and say that I didn't listen to anything on my own time this week, which is basically true, unless you count a couple albums that I listened to taking a short trip out of town, but I don't really count the CDs in my car for this kind of thing because mostly I'm just listening to those, to and fro from work, and, well, that kind of doesn't really count, and I only have a handful of CDs. If I was just counting those every time I listen to them every week, that would get kind of annoying, so I'm not going to do that. But thank you for watching this episode of Music Mania. If you did, if there's any notable releases, particularly in the realm of core, that I missed for this week, because basically everything this week was just singles, shout them out to me, let me know so that I can catch back up and circle back around to some of those things next week and further into the future. Thank you again for watching. For now, I've been your host, King Crusoe, but you can call me KC, and I'll be back in the next episode of Music Mania.